Valerie asked me to speak briefly about Jack as a church member. Now, she could be forgiven for knowing that it's a challenge for me to speak briefly, but she can't be forgiven for knowing it was a challenge to talk about Jack briefly. For he filled this place for 48 years. The booming baritone laugh that Thomas talked about was ever present. You didn't need a GPS to find Jack if you were here in Vine Street. He, in so many ways, shaped the place where you sit today. He taught from the time he got here. I first remember him 45 years ago when we got here. Our first experience was as a teacher, and he taught throughout the entire time. As a teacher, he never laid out facts to absorb, but rather he taught us to think. He taught us that real learning comes by wrestling with the questions, not getting answers. A skilled preacher, the times I really remember though, are those times when he came to the pulpit in times of trouble. Because his calm, reassuring manner helped us keep things in perspective. And his humor, oh my, his humor. He was ever ready to use levity, just the right time and just the right way. I don't know whether Jack was acquainted with Facebook, but I can tell him that he lives today, on this Wednesday, he lives on the pages of Facebook because it's brimming with Jack Forstman stories. Joe Blosser, an intern that you probably all will remember, recounts the time when Fred Craddock was scheduled to speak. And if I remember correctly, everything in the South was iced over that Saturday. And there was no way for Fred to make it. And Joe Blosser was asked on Saturday before that Sunday to deliver the sermon. And the pressure was immense on Joe, poor Joe. And before the service, Joe and Jack stood together at the back, and I'm sure Jack was thinking, how do I relax this man? And the church filled just like it is today. And when someone stood up and announced that Fred couldn't make it, the church began to empty. By Joe's account, nearly half the people left. And Jack turned to Joe and said, well, now that ought to relieve the pressure. He used that humor regularly, but he used it skillfully. He taught us to laugh. But you also know beneath that humor was bedrock seriousness. Jack's professional life was about understanding Scripture in a historical context. And he viewed the social issues of the day through that lens. He loved to wrestle with serious, complex matters. He taught us the value of deep reflection and thought in finding solution to the day's vexing problems. On more than a few occasions when passionate feelings generated overheated rhetoric, Jack never took the bait to escalate. He knew just how to calm things down. Now, Jack could be passionate, especially about, I remember, just as a for instance, about the issue of capital punishment. Jack felt very keenly on some of these issues, but his delivery was always genteel gentleness. His was the voice that kept reason in view when emotion threatened. And it must be said that this giant of a man never, ever used his considerable intellect, experience, or lofty position as a tool to reinforce or elevate his point of view above others. But have no doubt, Jack had a point of view. And as enamored as we have always been of Jack, he was never enamored of himself. As intelligent he was, he had a poverty of knowledge on the subject of self-aggrandizement. I remember just a few Sundays ago when Newell Williams stood here and read this long resolution enumerating Jack's many accomplishments. I remember that when he came down to receive the resolution from Newell, his discomfort was palpable. Those kinds of things made Jack really uncomfortable. Jack taught humility by the way he lived. He taught service. He served on everything. And singing in the choir was one of his loves. But another story on Facebook this morning showed how he could combine his bedrock seriousness with humor. I'm told that you guys were practicing the song one day during Lent. And during the middle of the song, Jack threw the music down and said, "I can't sing this any longer. It's bad theology." Facebook. The church was the center of Jack's life, but also Jack was the center of the church's life while he was here. Teilhard de Chardin once said, "Do not forget that the value and interest of life is not so much to do conspicuous things as to do ordinary things with a perception of their enormous value." Jack really understood that. Jack accomplished much that others considered extraordinary, but he lived in the ordinary because he understood its enormous value. And in the process, his life among us taught us all the real meaning of the word extraordinary. We give thanks to God for revealing a part of himself through the life of Jack Forstman here in this place.
I've been asked to read a paragraph from the acknowledgments part of a book by one of Jack's graduate students and obvious admirers. The paragraph is an affectionate and insightful and even eloquent tribute and celebration to Jack. The author of the paragraph is Doris and Mai's daughter, Wendy Farley. And the book is called Gathering Those Driven Away, A Theology of the Incarnation. I am grateful that I did my own graduate training at Vanderbilt Divinity School, where the ethical passions of my professors reinforced the rigor of their analysis and the creativity to which they called us. I would like to give a particular shout out to Jack Forstman, former Dean of the Divinity School. His support of my work from the very beginning, notwithstanding the complexities of attending a school where my dad taught, made my entrance into graduate work possible. He was a wonderful teacher, gracious with the figures we studied, as with us. His gigantic laugh will haunt my ears, I hope, all my days. In particular, I want to acknowledge his astonishing moral compass. When my partner and I talked with him over a glass of wine one December, she recalled the painful reception she received as an MDiv student at a certain school of theology when she tried to create a space for LGBT community sacred worth. Jack was sympathetic to the pressures a dean might feel, but in his non-judgmental way, recall the opposite response that occurred under his watch at Vanderbilt. We wish the people who write inspiring works like Christian faith in dark times are as inspirational in real life, but it is not always the case. But his deep goodness is evident in his spontaneous recognition of the moral high ground, even in those moments when it is not at all clear in what direction history is moving. I loved him all the more when he told the story of his own coming to graduate work. He finished college at a somewhat conservative Christian school and sold insurance. This path to fortune, if not fame, was rerouted when a small church in Alabama asked him to be their preacher. He said he did not know what or that he believed. They accepted him on those terms. They would explore questions of doubt and faith together. It is perhaps because he entered ministry and then graduate education on the basis of his doubt that his moral compass has stayed so clear these many years.